CEOs with very broad and diverse background with us. Both Sanjay and Arjuna have a wide variety of experience from startups to mature companies, from a wide variety of industries, organizations that are local and global. And as a former CEO myself, what strikes me is, as a leader of service companies for 3 decades, for me, HR was always a very personal thing. I was never an HR professional in the classic sense, but I always had my HR leader reporting directly to me because in a service organization, we're only as good as the people that we have in our organizations. And so I guess from your perspectives, in terms of the breadth of your experience and where your careers have taken you, I'm curious as to your sense of the role that you have wanted from your HR organizations and how they have been critical to the success of your companies. Arjuna, maybe we can begin with you.
Good morning, everyone. No, so I think throughout my career, as I've built several different companies, I've always felt that I've always been people-focused. I've always been people-oriented. So actually, when I was picking up my knowledge, and getting my breadth of experience, I was always focused on people. So for me, HR was always part of anything that I did. And essentially, that's the way I've built my current company. And they are intrinsically involved in every aspect of the business. They actually get involved. My HR partner gets involved in terms of the strategic decisions to invest, decisions to go into new territories, different practices. So, and I believe because of the skew that I have, and the belief that people are absolutely the only thing that is important in each of our organizations, that's helped because that's kind of driven that thinking.
Yeah. Sanjay?
Yeah, I think, Arjuna, you make a couple of good points there where you think about HR as being a partner. In my life, worked in different parts of the world with different kinds of organizations, both large as well as startups. And I've found, and I was talking to Nick just before the session, when you start up, you are the HR. That's what you are. You're not only the HR, but you're also the CFO, you're also, more often than not, the person who's managing the administration as well as making sure that you are meeting the numbers. But as you grow, you recognize the fact that complex organizations require design thinking, and they require professionals. So as you stop crossing the office to make a decision and start walking the processes to make a decision, you require people who can make those things happen. You require a bridge, fundamentally a bridge between the employees and the leadership. And it's a two-way bridge. It makes sure that the North Star that the organization has set for itself, it's working both ways. The employees are kind of heading in the right direction, and I think more often than not, they're also a conscience keeper for the leadership and making sure the leadership is heading in the right direction. That's the place where I have always found HR being a really active conscience keeper, that's being their best role. Certainly for me, I was very, very fortunate to have some really, really good HR people working with me. They made sure that, let's say, what I promised as a vision was something that I kept to.
My best HR people were always what I call the truth tellers. Yeah. People who would force me to look at a situation, tell me what I was seeing, or tell me what I was not seeing, and force me to deal with it, even if I didn't want to. That was critical. Now, one of the things, Sanjay, in our discussion that you referenced, we were talking about how, in the beginning, the CEO for a new organization picks everybody. So as you say, the CEO is HR. That is top leadership's responsibility for every person in the organization. As you grow an organization, how do you work with your HR team, your HR leaders, to ensure that all leadership is engaged with people throughout the organization? Because I think that's a critical function.
Yeah. You want to take it? Yeah, all right. It's a really, really important thing. I think, how do you take the vision that you have, or I think the desire that you have, and convert it into an executable action, right?
Yeah.
And I think that's where really the HR practitioner plays a significant role, because they know how do you take this thing that you want to do, this vision that you have, the visions around diversity, the visions around gender equality, the visions that you have around careers, etc. How do you translate that into executable processes? And there are some really, really good techniques and practices that I have learned from my HR people who worked with me, who taught me how to do that. Right? Mm-hmm. At the end of the day, and all of us will recognize this because all of us have worked in different parts of the world, if you want to scale something, you can't scale it through a statement of intent. If you want to scale something, you want to do it with actually building the right infrastructure and the right action. And that's where those practitioners really play an important role. That's what I found. I don't know you.
Absolutely, Sanjay. I think from our perspective and from my perspective, essentially what we've tried to do and in every single organization, but currently from a HR point of view and how leadership across the company is actually involved. So we've tried to, I still interview have a final interview with every person across the globe at the final interview. So essentially I basically have the chance to talk to them, understand who they are, what their family background is, and that is critical because I want to know who I'm hiring. That's the first step. Then throughout the process in terms of their growth, in terms of first of all the fact that they in the first 6 months how they're progressing, how at the 3-month check, a 6-month check, we actually have the key leaders in the organization actually involved to critique, to give them feedback, and that's critical. So we made sure that it's not only HR, it's HR amongst the leadership, and they drive that message across to people that our team members, that basically we care all the way through, and essentially that carries on throughout the lifespan of an employee at our organization, and whether it's reviews, constant feedback. We're trying to switch into quarterly feedback, and that's something really that's important. If you're not giving feedback to your team members, it's not going to work. So essentially that's what we're trying to do in a nutshell in terms of pushing out the whole HR aspect of it across our leadership.
Now, you're raising an interesting point, Arjuna, because if I think about what these folks here spend a large amount of their time dealing with, frequently it is the, what I call, perhaps impolitely, the stupid people tricks created by managers who do things they shouldn't or don't do things that they should. And how have you been able to leverage HR in terms of making your management and your leaders more capable of basic HR functions, basic HR knowledge, so that in turn frees up HR to focus on more strategic areas for you and your organization?
That's an interesting question. I think what we've done is, this is in the current context, we've actually made a decision that we obviously need to get them involved, but what we've done is we've actually gone into partnering mode. We've got them HR in as business partners, and they actually do a lot of work with people. Now, what we've tried to do actually is to try and drive a culture where leaders have the right framework, the right approach to actually manage people. So we've driven and we worked with SHRM to essentially develop our own set of values. We were a startup within a very large company, Brandix, in Sri Lanka. We didn't really have our own identity. And so in the last couple of years, we've actually driven an approach where we've built up our own values. We call them CHIP: caring, humility, integrity, passion. Those are the basis on which we drive our company. And essentially, we decided to then drive those values as being non-negotiable. So leaders in the organization need to be able to drive with those values. Now, apart from that, we also sat down and then delivered a purpose. I mean, what are we doing in the world? And we essentially said we're delivering solutions that matter. So whatever it is, whatever the world throws at us, where we've got a common theme across everything we do with our customers. And so we've actually developed the framework now to ensure that our leaders actually, and it's gone on to competencies, it's gone on to the structure of how we do things. So that framework is really what I think Sanjay alluded to before, in terms of that governance, that framework that's actually helping leaders now manage people better. And I think that's the crux of it, because you can't do it on a sort of a knee-jerk reaction. It has to be holistic, the approach that we take.
Now, Sanjay, Arjuna has raised the topic of culture, which is a key function of CEOs everywhere, to drive culture, to change culture when necessary. How have you relied on your HR people in the past to help you drive culture as you've wanted it as a CEO in your organizations?
Yeah. I've often found one of the most abused words in the HR language or in the HR conversation is culture, right? Everybody's trying to build a culture, everybody's trying to drive a culture. But I think the most important thing is companies make a decision. Mm-hmm. And they make a decision about what do they want to do and what do they want to be. They make those decisions, and they are pretty conscious decisions. Sometimes it's overtly conscious, but oftentimes it's not so overt, but it is there. And they make that decision, and culture really flows from there. When we think about culture, and oftentimes when you are talking to various people, they say, oh, we have a culture of openness, we have a culture of friendliness, and we have a culture of transparency. But what does that really mean? What are you trying to say? Are your employees more transparent than another organization's employees? So that's where you start thinking about some of these things, and you want to get back and say, what is it that I want to drive? For the company that I work in now, we are in the technology business, really rapid clock speeds. And our biggest imperative for driving change is the pace of change. That's our biggest imperative. Mm-hmm. We absolutely need to almost demolish ourselves almost every 18 months and become a new company in 18 months. It's almost like that because of the pace of change of the technology area that we are in. But that was a conscious choice that we made, that we want to be in that technology area, and conscious choice we made that we have to keep reinventing ourselves. So one of the most important initiatives which drives the culture of change is what we call the change index. It's a tool that we use. Every year there is a company-wide dipstick through surveys, through conversations, which says how ready are you for change and what do you need to make that change happen. And this is done every year. It's published, and then there are actions which follow from there. That's a commitment that the leadership has made to make that happen. And it is visible and it's apparent, and maybe that's the culture.
And how does HR help you drive that?
They are actually the leaders who run those programs, because at some point of time, and I think I came in at the tail end of the keynote speaker, and I think he referenced to the fact that HR needs to be the family friend, right? What I would say, HR needs to be the neutral arbiter, right? HR needs to be a safe place for people who can go and speak to them. HR needs to become that safe place. Every organization needs that safe place, and HR can be that place. And that's what they do.
So Arjuna, in the context of change, because change is core to you as it is to Sanjay, how does HR help you create a place of safety for employees who may not necessarily be comfortable with change?
So I think just to address the point of change, I've been used to change all my life. So for me, I'm expecting change in the next few minutes, perhaps. I think when I first joined Brandex and then started up this company, I essentially took them through I would call it a roller coaster ride, purely because I think a lot of people aren't used to change. And the reality is, I think, even with my HR team, I essentially got them used to the fact that they need to be involved in it. So essentially, where we've got to now is HR is involved in communication. Communication is key. At the end of the day, we're no longer able to, say if I want to shift to another technology, to another market, it's something that we discuss, we communicate clearly. Then HR works with each of the leaders in the organization to create change agents, to essentially ensure that they're driving the same message across each department, each division, so that essentially it's a single message that's running through. So I think those are the two key aspects. And essentially, we've also created a safe environment where, we've said fail fast. We've said, it's okay to fail. I always believe in the fact that, you should always, everyone needs to make mistakes, needs to fail, as long as you don't keep repeating the same mistake. So I think creating that safe environment has also been key in change.
Okay. Now, Arjuna is right. It's time for some change. We have some microphones out in the audience. If you would like to ask questions, please find a person with a microphone. And while you're locating them and thinking of your questions, let me ask another topic relevant to the professional development of your HR teams. Obviously, with SHRM, we have our body of competency and knowledge for HR professionals. What do you see as the most critical competencies for HR professionals today? What do they need to have in order to be successful in today's environment? Sanjay, how about if we start with you?
And I'm talking about my world, where I think it's probably different in different parts of the world from an industry, cultural perspective. But in my world, I think the most important thing that I find is that the HR managers need to be listeners. They need to have a way to figure out what is happening within the organization. Oftentimes, when you seek opinion, you normally don't get the kind of feedback that you can act upon. So a really good HR function is listening to the organization and listening and figuring out what to do. If you can listen and figure out what to do and do it before it becomes a problem, you've done 95% of the situation.
Okay.
Right? And you don't necessarily have to listen to people, hear them speak. You should listen to their silence. I think you can get more from people by listening to their silence than listening to them speak, right? So that's really important. So I think listening skills, to my mind, is the most important where I live.
Okay. Arjuna?
Absolutely. I think from a listening point of view, and being able to listen proactively, to understand what trends are occurring, what the sort of the grapevine is beating in terms of what sort of information. But I guess the other side is, I've always felt that HR needs to be at the table, and as I come back to that point, they're critical in every part of my business. I mean, I don't have machinery, I don't have factories. I essentially have people going out there and building services, and the ability for HR to understand the business, to be able to understand what we're doing, what kind of solutions we're delivering to our customers. So much so that I've tried to actually expose HR leadership and the team to being at customer sites, understanding how we make a difference. Why is it that we will, a customer saying out in Australia will want to work with us? Why does someone out in the US maybe not as happy to work with us? How do we change that? Because they're key change agents again. And essentially, if they don't understand the business, if they don't know intrinsically what's happening, how we're making commercial decisions, how do they effect change? How do they help the organization grow? So that's critical for me.
Okay. In the audience, do we have any questions?
Yeah. Good morning. you just spoke that, one of the word that HR uses is HR culture is abusive. Now, I would like to know, in case if it's a startup, what kind of culture a person can bring because one or two people are working in the organization.
Who wants to take that on first?
So I just want to repeat the question to you so that I make sure that I've got the right question, right? So when you're talking about when you have a startup, what kind of a culture do you want to bring into a startup?
Yeah. If it's one or two people are just working,
Yeah.
then how can a culture can be built up? Because yes, trust, all these things would be there, but there are two unknown people who are starting a startup. So how do they build up the culture, and how can they, cascade it down as soon as they start growing up?
Yeah.
Thank you.
In my experiences, and I'll defer to Anand for his thinking, but in my experiences, when you're a startup, you don't take, let's say, a deliberate step back kind of an approach of building a culture. When you're a startup, the biggest thing which is occupying your mind is to accelerate your growth. That's the biggest thing which is occupying your mind. And culture almost develops organically. It is not a thoughtful process. 4 or 5 people get together and they're working together and they develop a culture of working together which works, and it works well for everybody, right? I think that's where it starts organically. There is no one culture which is like a panacea for anything else. There are two really, really large, perhaps some of the biggest tech companies. One is in Cupertino and the other one is in Mountain View. And if you go to these two companies, they are both leaders in their own rights. They have completely different cultures. One offers free food, one you got to pay for. One has a culture of quarterly reviews. The other one doesn't believe in reviews, right? So they are completely different things. So to answer your point, I think as a startup, you start and you should be focused really on the growth. The culture will follow you. You need a culture when you have a larger organization because you need a culture. The culture is the binding system to deliver your vision and your mission. In a small startup, there are 5, 6 people. There is not that much need for it. I'm not saying it's not important, but there's not much need to have an overt declaration of culture. But as you grow it, you absolutely need that. That's a scale problem, right? As you go from startup, yeah.
I actually don't have that much to add there. I think I absolutely agree with Sanjay. I think exactly. I mean, till you have a business, a viable business, it's about actually just driving to that point. It's once you get viability and then it becomes commercial that you actually then need to think about how you're going to grow the business. And so if you're not at that point yet, it's critical to focus on the issue at hand and the objective at hand. And once you get to that point, the reality is there's so much happening. I mean, just to give you an example, when I came into the current organization, so I started what is now Fortune with a group of people who were focused on project work. So now I basically converted that into a viable commercial opportunity. Within that group, there was no diversity. There was one lady and 25 guys, right? And so essentially, when we got to the point, then we started working on the percentage in terms of diversity, in terms of inclusion, and essentially now we've grown it to almost 30% in terms of the organization. But at that starting point, we really couldn't think about all those aspects, what part of culture, and it was about basically making sure everyone got through the first year, and then then how do we prosper? How do we build things out? So that's just my perspective.
Thank you. Excellent points. Do we have another question?
Hi, this is Ram. My question is, when there's a change of CEO for an established organization, the organization goes through a lot of change. Is it organization getting tuned to the new CEO, or the CEO tuning to the organization which got built over a period of time? How does it happen?
Really great question. It all depends why is there a change in CEO. If the change in CEO is a succession, and it's a planned succession, etc., then I think there is some level of cultural continuity which takes place. If the change of CEO is because you need a new CEO to save the business, or you need to create a disruption to make sure that the business can move on to the next level, then the CEO drives change, and that includes culture. So it depends also, what the CEO change is all about. I don't know whether that answers your question.
I would add that, there's some recent examples. If you look at Uber, for example, the CEO change was brought in precisely to drive a change in culture. So I think your point is exactly right. It depends on this, very situational. We have another question right down here.
Well, I'm Anil Verma, chairman of a small group of enterprises. I'm gold medalist in HR, and I'm applying all those canons which I have learned in my studies. There is no substitute for empathization. There is no substitute for empathy. My employee, who is being offered double than what I'm offering him, is not still quitting me because of my empathies with him and his family members. I hope you all will agree with me. So that needs to be imbibed, has to be thrived in all the organizations to retain. Retention is more difficult than employing. So I am believing in that principles, and I am retaining my employees for the last 25 years, although I'm in a private sector. Those who had once ventured to go out have returned back. That's my experience.
Arjuna?
Oh, and that's fantastic. That's what we strive for as CEOs. Essentially, my aim is to retain. At the end of the day, obviously there's a certain number of people perhaps who are desired in terms of potential attrition. But the reality is, it's what drives me. So we can have culture, we can have everything set up as a framework, but it is empathy. It is basically how you treat your people. We've driven a culture where we do CSR projects, but we actually first like to think that we're looking after our own. So if someone has a financial problem, if there's an opportunity to help them, to empathize about an illness, to understand. I like to know exactly who is ill, if a child is ill, if there's a problem that we can help with. Actually to that point, retention is absolutely key, because we invest so much in people, in technical training, understanding, and they become a core part of our business. Without understanding their problems, their day-to-day issues, what's making them, driving them, we can't hope to retain people. So absolutely, agree with you, sir.
I have a slightly different view on this, right? When I first started working, and I promise you it was many years back when I started working, right? As soon as I started working, the questions that my friends, families, neighbors would ask is, where do you work? It was all about which organization you worked for. My daughters just started working a few years back, and the question that is being asked is, what do you do? That's a big change. What gives meaning to my life was the institution I belong to. What gives meaning to a newer generation of people is what impact do they have. And I think that has changed. So whereas I agree with you that there is a need for reaching out and knowing your people, but I think it's more than just taking care of them. When you want to know them, you have to understand what makes them come to work every day. And if what makes them come to work every day is the richness of the job, then they will come to work. If they have a meaningful job, if they're not able to find meaning in that job, then I'm afraid, I don't know, even if you have the most, let's say, patriarchal organization, you won't be able to retain people. I'm sure, besides being patriarchal, you're also offering a meaningful job. That's what makes people stay. I think that's the way I think about it.
Yeah, absolutely. I think we have time for one more question from the floor.
Hi, I am Dr. Nirupma Srivastav. I am from Create Energy India Limited. And my question is, you have mentioned that every 18 months you are going to transform the whole process. So what steps your HR is taking to make it very strategically successful?
So, great thing. So one I spoke about the change index and all of those things, right? So now that you know that this is what is required, the one part of an organization which is really, really important, and HR does this in our organization where I work right now, is once you make that conscious business decision that you have to change every 18 months, then you also make some conscious decisions around the change investments you need to make. And one of the biggest change investments that you need to make is around enablement and training. You consciously have to decide, saying that maybe 20% of your time, employees' time, needs to go into training. Maybe 30% needs to go in a certain different sector, and then you have to make that happen. Because just by saying you want to change, you're not going to get there. You actually have to put some resources and some really hard dollars and rupees behind that initiative. Otherwise, it's just lip service. It doesn't work.
Arjuna, you're engaged in this.
No, absolutely. I think initially there were a lot of, I have to say, as a CEO, I made a lot of decisions, knee jerk. I just did stuff, and my HR partner will definitely say, you probably shouldn't have done that. But the reality is, as we've grown, we plan change better. So I probably my cycle time is probably less than 18 months because we keep adding different practices. We keep expanding our footprint because we're in that stage of growth. But we handle it a lot better. And so HR is in on it from the word go, from when it's still a glint in my eye. And essentially that means that they're prepared for it. There's better change management, and as Sanjay rightly said, we put a business case behind it that actually then helps us plan for it and then communicate it. Hope that helps.
So thank you very much for your questions. We're just about out of time, but I did want to ask as we finish up here, for each of you gentlemen to provide one bit of advice that you think is key to the HR professionals we have here with us today. Sanjay, maybe you first.
One,
only one, yes.
Let me make it short, and I'm just thinking, I think the most important thing is to be authentic. Come across as authentic, be honest. Oftentimes, you will be asked to convey bad news. Be authentic about it. Be professional about it. Be honest. Don't try to couch it. I feel bad for you, but I got to do this. That doesn't just cut anymore, right? Just have to be authentic, to be honest. I think that's the most important thing I would say.
Wonderful. Arjuna?
For me, it's basically that HR has to be at the table, and I mean HR has to be at the decision table. They need to be involved at a leadership level. There needs to be essentially, if there's a board in the company, it needs to be driven by them. Because I feel a lot of companies still, and I see a lot of customers, large scale, smaller scale, who don't really have that. And what we've tried to do in our organization is basically have them at the table and making decisions, being involved in decisions rather than hearing those decisions down the track. So and if you're in an organization that doesn't do that, you'll have to fight for it. Okay.
Well, thank you very much. I'm sure if you have additional questions, if you can find these gentlemen, they will be happy to discuss them with you. And we hope you enjoy the rest of the conference. So thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you, Arjuna, Nick, and Sanjay.